6 months ago, the United Nations turned 80. For some, this anniversary was a reason to celebrate the UN as a lasting venue for world politics, the norms it has created, and the lives it has saved. But the UN has come under attack as a platform, as an institution, and as a system of values. Some critics describe the UN as ineffective, as bloated, dysfunctional, and irrelevant. Others portray it as an institution that is unaligned with member countries' perceived self-interest. And thus I see it as potentially harmful for a world of my country first. Major contributors are reducing their payments to the UN. Some do so for ideological or populist reasons. Others to finance their new, expensive armament efforts, especially in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. To address this, a group of scholar practitioners at Columbia, at the School of International Public Affairs, SIPA, wrote a report that we published today. In defense of multilateralism, the UN we must aspire to. My name is Daniel Naujoks, and I am the faculty director for the United Nations Partnership Initiative at SIPA. We try to infuse academic knowledge and expertise into multilateral processes. And other authors of the report are my colleagues José Antonio Campo, sitting on the panel here, Scott Barrett and Ben Orloff, who we'll see in the second panel, and Professor Dirk Solomons, I think, is somebody in the panel too, in the audience. And my colleagues Jean-Marie Guénaud and Jyotsna Puri irregularly couldn't be with us today. In our report, we highlight 10 essential distinctions to make sense of the UN, 10 major achievements, and 10 recommendations to create the UN we must aspire to. When critics describe the UN as ineffective, it is often unclear if they have intricate knowledge of the UN Capital Development Fund's program on expanding financial access in Myanmar, whether they lament the political stalemate at the UN Security Council, whether they question the impact of soft law governance for climate, or if they complain any other topic that is related to multilateral cooperation. As a matter of fact, critics often are confused by what the UN is, and admittedly, it is complicated. Are we concerned about the UN as a platform for member states, or for the international bureaucracy? Are we sufficiently considering the different funds, programs, and agencies that make up the UN family? Are proposals clear about the levels the UN's work at the global versus the country level? Do arguments take into account that the UN operates in a space of global governance without being actually a global government? And are discussions sufficiently clear about the different functions the UN has? In our report, we outline 14 different functions that the first and the second UN may have. Many important distinctions within the UN system make a sweeping statement about the UN problematic. Any generalizing claim that the UN is ... is necessarily wrong. In the current reform discussions, we often forget about the UN's tangible achievements. In our report, we emphasize 10 clear-cut examples that show the UN's significant impact on our world. We also emphasize the limited resources with which the UN is achieving these things. For example, the budget of all 11 active peacekeeping operations is less than the budget of the New York City Police Department. The expenses of the entire UN system, funds, programs, research and training institutes, specialized and related agencies, for expenses in humanitarian assistance, human rights, climate, health, education, economic development, elections, peacekeeping, peacebuilding, and overall global governance, are less than half of the annual city budget of New York City. And we don't say that we should expect less from the UN's impact, but it is worth noting that resources matter, and the UN is achieving what it is achieving with a significant small amount of resources. Let me mention 4 out of the 10 achievements we mentioned in the report. The UN's work is a major factor in reducing the number of interstate and intrastate wars. In the past 3 years alone, the UN and its humanitarian partners have delivered life-sustaining and life-saving assistance to 340 million people in the world. The UN has saved millions of lives through leading the world to eradicate smallpox, by containing the Ebola epidemic, and increasing vaccinations. And the last example I want to mention is the UN Montreal Protocol, which phased out the production and use of ozone-depleting substances, thus saving the ozone layer and saving millions of lives here. Importantly, our report outlines 10 recommendations to create the UN we must aspire to. We will discuss many of these in the panels you have in front of you. But let me mention a few. We have to make the UN less process-oriented and pivot towards more impacts. UN reform must focus on the specific role the UN plays for global public goods and issues that require international, transboundary cooperation, commitment, and accountability. And collectively, we must restore the authority of the UN Charter when it comes to the limited force of use of force in interstate relations, especially when it comes to the use of force, military force, as a preventative tool. We have to secure the commitment of more member states for more unearmarked and pooled funding. We suggest to create a UN Global Economic Development Economic Cooperation Council to bring the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization closer to the UN. And our second panel will discuss this in detail. We would like to create a UN mechanism that holds states more accountable for climate, environment, and biodiversity outcomes. We held the first State of the World conference in September 2024, 2 days after the UN General Assembly adopted the ambitious Pact for the Future. In the Pact, states expressed the desire to, I quote, transform global governance and reinvigorate the multilateral system to tackle the challenges and seize the opportunities of today and tomorrow, unquote. This ambition seems further away now, but today's global geopolitical configuration will not last forever. Our report is meant as a compass that helps us to orient our efforts in the right direction. We hope you engage with our vision for the UN, and I look forward to 3 exciting panels to elucidate several of these aspects. Excellencies, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, both here in the room and online. In the name of SIPA, the Institute of Global Politics and Colombia Global, I welcome you to the 2026 State of the World Conference, the UN we must aspire to. I promise you won't hear me talking that much anymore. We now start with our first panel, which is on the UN must aspire to sustainable development. One of the most visible parts of the UN's work is on sustainable development. Conceptually, methodologically, collecting data, running operations, providing policy advice, and much more. In our report, several achievements and recommendations focus on the UN's role for development. Not only for setting agendas, setting the global development agenda and monitoring it, but also when it comes to on-the-ground operations. Most people are actually unaware that the UN works in over 1,100 locations across more than 190 countries. And my own research is on UN cooperation frameworks at the country level. But let me turn to our first distinguished guest. To my left, I'm sitting Ambassador Parvata Neni Harish. who has served over the last many years in missions and headed missions of India and consulates in Cairo, Riyadh, Gaza City, Houston, Germany, and Vietnam. Now he serves as permanent representative of India to the UN. And among the many things he has done in his life, I want to highlight two aspects. One is he was also seconded to the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, where he led for 5 years the Policy Analysis Unit. And at the Ministry of External Affairs in India, he led the Economic Diplomacy and Multilateral Economic Relations Division. So there he was an Indian sous Sherpa for the G20, G7, and the BRICS. So he is extremely well positioned to tell us about how India, one of the key countries today in the world in multilateral relations, sees development. So Ambassador Harish, thank you for being here. Many critics deride the UN as obsolete, dysfunctional, and ineffective. From your experience, are there any achievements of the multilateral system that you would like to highlight? And would you say we need the UN today, especially when it comes to development?
Thank you very much, Daniel, for inviting me and for having this distinguished panel discuss this important subject. I think when the framers of the UN Charter discussed the various pillars of the United Nations, they clearly wanted a delicate balance to exist between the three pillars of the UN, peace and security, development, and human rights. In the larger Committee of Nations, you have some nations which are focused on peace and security within the UN. You have some countries which are very keen and push for the human rights pillar of the UN. But for majority of countries of the global south, I think the development pillar is very, very important. They look to the UN to get access to technologies, investments, market access, and see how best they could improve their economic situation, launch themselves on a path of economic growth. The UN has had a very good track record ever since the establishment of the UNDP. This has been a very successful organization to start with. Then the development pillar developed many other institutions during the course, some dealing with food, some dealing with health, which is intricately linked to the development pillar, of course, education. And the whole development pillar today is a complex interplay of numerous UN institutions, deals with climate. Each one of them exist as different funds, programs, agencies, coordinated at times by the UN Secretariat, coordinated at the field level, at the operational level by UN resident coordinators who are able to bring this huge UN machine together and deliver the goods to citizens in various countries in the developing world. Their achievements are impressive. In times of crisis, after man-made and natural disasters, after a cataclysmic event like the COVID pandemic, you will have the development pillar reach out and provide assistance and ensure people's needs are responded to. It works closely with the humanitarian pillar of the UN that has been extremely effective. But yes, today we stand at a moment where you refer to the Pact for the Future, and the Pact for the Future has good things to say about what we need to do to revitalize the development pillar. But it's one of those quirks of fate and history that within a few months after our leaders agreed on the Pact for the Future, the whole of last year, 2025, we have spent, at least since April, exactly a year ago, when the UN 80 initiative was discussed and launched, the whole discussion has shifted towards internal processes of the UN, issues of efficiency within the UN, what better can be done to rationalize processes, how can institutions be modified. In a way, the discussion has come down to pennies and posts. And the larger picture is lost sight of. But for developing countries, the development arm of the UN has been very, very successful. Yet, here is a word of caution. We should not try to fix something that isn't broke. UNDP, as one of the leading development pillars of the UN, has been extremely successful. Even as we look at ways to make it better, we shouldn't try to fix something that's working well. For the rest of the system, yes, we can improve effective service delivery through the UN Resident Coordinator Network. We can work on some of those aspects. But broadly, the development pillar has delivered. If you were to speak to various member states who are part of the G77, for example, they will tell you the development pillar has delivered well for them. And they don't want too much of tinkering with something that is working. When people say the UN doesn't work, as you correctly pointed out, they're not referring to the development pillar that has delivered extraordinarily well. They're referring primarily to issues of peace and security and the Security Council's functioning. And that indeed is completely out of sync with today's realities. As the Secretary General put it, it is an institution created by our grandparents that is completely out of sync for our grandchildren. So I think if there is anything that we need to do in the UN to make it great again, so to speak, I think we need substantive reform of the Security Council and its architecture that reflects 1945 and not 2026. The development pillar has worked well. Of course, it isn't perfect. We can certainly improve it. But broadly, it has delivered the goods. ODA, shrinking ODA budgets, rising defense budgets, especially the last 2 years, the ODA budgets have significantly gone down. And 90% of the decrease in ODA budgets is accounted for by the top 5 countries, which is basically the US, UK, France, Germany, and Japan. And I think structurally, will this change significantly in the near future? Probably not. There is already a sense of fatigue in many of the countries, donor countries. I think we need to revisit this, give a big push to South-South and triangular cooperation, ensure greater synergies with the private sector and what can be done to ensure they are able to take part in the development process for global South countries. And as India, we have done, use technology to leapfrog the various stages of development through innovative use of technologies, digital public infrastructure, see how best we can help countries of the global South learn from each other's experience and probably deal in a global environment of shrinking ODA budgets and indeed rising defense budgets.
Thank you, Ambassador. This is greatly appreciated, your insights into the what the UN is doing well. And we get in the second round more on towards the recommendations, what is not working, what we need to fix. Let me now turn to our second panelist, Karima El-Khoury, who served as Director for Sustainable Development at the Executive Office of the Secretary General. For over 25 years, she has worked on many different aspects of international development. Before coming to the SG's office, she was the resident coordinator, the highest ranking official at the country level in Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei Darussalam, for 5 years. Before that, she was for many years at ESQA, at the Economic and Social Commission of Western Asia, based in Beirut. And there she also headed the 2030 Agenda Unit. It was a unit focusing on development. She organized the annual Arab Forum for Sustainable Development. And before that, she was chief of the Population and Social Development section. This is when we first met, I think 12 or 13 years ago. And since then, I've followed her. She's done amazing work. I'm very, very glad she's with us today. She also worked with UNDP before, and as an academic, she has lectured at Al Aqayan University in Morocco. Last fact I want to mention is that this must feel like a quasi-homecoming because she also has a master's degree from Teachers College, and we're kind of between SIPA, my own school, and Teachers College here. So, Karima, you have worked at the UN at the regional level, you've headed the UN at the country level, and now you're spearheading the global development discussions for the Secretary General. Leaving the reform needs for round 2 of our questions, are there any specific, tangible achievements that you have witnessed? Why do we need the UN for development?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Daniel, and great to be back here and great to see you again, and thank you for having me. Really exciting and quite emotional to be back in this neighborhood. I haven't been in a long time. I want to start by thanking you for the great work that you've done with that report. Again, a report that really has a very, very nice combination of clear-eyed assessment of the UN, very objective and very clear, but also solution-oriented. And I like the 10 plus 10 plus 10. I think it was very good to read. Now, just going back a bit to the question of criticism, right? And the criticism that is directed to the UN, I believe that it's often rooted less in distrust of the UN than in unfamiliarity with the UN. And now you have that question in the report that just says, what part of the UN are you referring to, right? If somebody says, well, the UN is doing nothing, and I think that question is important because the complexity of the system and the multiplicity of the different arms of the system makes it sometimes difficult to, and makes it also not very credible to have a generic judgment on that. And this is not to push back on criticism. Actually, we welcome it, and I think this is at the very core of UN 80 when we get to speak about it. Maybe allow me just for less than a minute to just talk about how we're doing development and in which context we're doing development at this point. The annual SDG financing gap, so the annual resources that we need for SDGs to move and be on track is about 4 trillion. It's exceeded actually $4 trillion US. ODA, as was mentioned by His Excellency Ambassador, fell by about 7% in 2024, but it actually fell by 23% in 2025, and that's the largest contraction on record. Debt service in developing countries hit 20-year high in 2024. So roughly 60% of LDCs and low-income countries are in debt distress or at risk of it. And what we are seeing unfolding in the current crisis in the Middle East is definitely going to push many countries, closer to the brink. 3.4 billion people live in countries that spend more on interest payment of these debts that they have accumulated than on health and education. So we do know where the resources are going. And of course, again, countries are not defaulting on their debt payment, but they are risking the investment in education and health and social protection and other. In 2024, global military spending surged to a record of $2.7 trillion US. And if it continues to grow, I think it's grown by about 4.9% over the past several years. If it grows at this pace, it will reach 4.5 trillion in 2030 or 35. So we're talking, and maybe even more, again, because we are seeing that there's a dynamic that is going towards more, armed conflict than peace. And finally, the UN system, absorbing the shock as much as we can, but it will see the resources projected, to fall from 66 billion to 50 billion, which is a 25% drop. So again, how much do you do, and continue to function and deliver? And we are very proud of our delivered work, but it's also, saying that something has to change. Multilateralism, I don't believe is broken. Multilateralism is strained, and it's strained probably to the max. It's not broken because the UN is still there. It's not broken because we were able, and you asked me about maybe a few achievements. If you look at 2025 and what we were able to achieve, again, at a time when we are going back to voting on, on declarations and resolutions, and I'm happy to talk about that at some point, the concept itself of multilateralism being at strain means that we need to do things differently, because it has at some point really touched on the issue of confidence and trust in the institution and in the way we deliver. So we are not actually saying that things are fine and we can just continue. I think business as usual is not an option, and it hasn't been for some time. I mean, with the current administration, with the Secretary General, he started his decade with very, very clear, need for the system to adjust, to reform at the operational level, at the development level, at the political and peace-building level. And I think what we need now and what UN80 comes to do is actually getting delivered what was not actually delivered over the past. So two quick achievements. Multilateralism, we got Sevilla commitment. And for me personally, I mean, I had to choose among many, but Sevilla commitment is the agreement that comes after the Addis Ababa Action Agenda back in 2015, which was laying the ground for how we're going to be financing the Sustainable Development Goals. It was adopted in July 2015, and then the SDGs came in September 2015. We needed a decade later to readjust and rethink financing for development in light of what we have seen over the past decade. And Sevilla commitment is really a rethinking. A lot of it is already in the Addis Ababa, but it's really coming to expand options for financing and to look at this ecosystem that enables development to really be resourced properly to really move forward. But it also addresses issues of debt. It addresses issues of the reform of the architecture, and you were saying, grandparents and grandchildren, which is not fit for purpose. It is not possible at the current, rate and the current regulatory framework to say that we will be, anywhere close to the 4.2, I think, trillion that is now the SDG gap. So the FFD, I think, is one. The other one, which will speak to this, perhaps audience as well, is the AI governance. Where is the UN in what's happening with AI globally? And to what extent can we, can we accept that the UN is totally outside of the conversation? And I think the efforts that member states have put into bringing that dialogue, to the UN through an independent panel of scientists on AI and through a dialogue that will happen, on an annual basis to really, look into both the guardrails that are needed for AI governance, because it is, at risk of being totally out of control, but also making sure that we have that platform for the conversation to happen on how we're going to be adjusting to something that is so fast changing and so fast moving that, without those guardrails, it would be difficult. So that perhaps is what I will stop at this point, but happy to engage again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And by the way, so at CEPA, my school, we have two members of the advisory committee on AI, Maria Ressa being one of them. And so we all look very much forward to understanding how the UN and these experts can actually shape AI governance. Let me turn to our next presenter, José Antonio Ocampo, who I've had the pleasure introduce many times, and every time I introduce him, it's a very dizzying thing because he has his list of accomplishments is very, very long. So he is currently the director of the Economic and Political Development Concentration, and Professor Jenny McGill also the co-director of the concentration here too. He is a member and former chair of the UN Committee for Development Policy. He's a member and former chair of the Independent Commission on Tax Reform, reform of international corporation taxation. Importantly, and that's how I met him first, he was UN Under-Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, the highest person in the UN Secretariat working on economic issues. He was executive and secretary of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, the Regional Commission. In his home country, Colombia, he was Minister of Finance, and he had many, many other distinguished positions in the Colombian government. And I might add, another feather in his cap is he is also one of the co-authors of our report in defense of multilateralism. José Antonio, you've worked on so many different issues when it comes to development policy, development finance. And one thing I didn't mention earlier is last year you served as chair of the International Commission of Experts for the FFD, the Finance for Development conference in Sevilla that we just heard about. And in fact, right now I think you were just coming from the UN for 2 days of discussions on financing for development. how would you respond to critics claiming that the UN has had no impact? Are there any achievement, any success stories at all?
Well, thank you, Daniel, for that generous presentation and for organizing this event, and actually the joint document that you mentioned also. Let me say that when you think of it, I mean, the achievements of the United Nations are impressive, actually. I mean, they are, to start with, associated to, to the conferences, summits, and actually the conventions, the legal agreements that are, taken in. So you can, go through all of them. Let me say, perhaps start with the global goals. I mean, the UN launched the Millennium Development Goals, of course, after the just at the Millennium Summit, but then the Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030. And what is impressive is that the SDGs are really recognized as the global goals. I mean, the achievements in terms of, not only for the UN, because it's for many other organizations that will have to contribute to that. In terms of conferences, for example, the FFD is, of course, very important. But when you look historically, there are many others. For example, the Earth Summit of Rio de Janeiro, 1992. That's really the launch of the major environmental goals of humanity, let's say, in climate change, biodiversity, and desertification. Anyway, but let me perhaps do a little list. Labor standards. ILO, which is the oldest UN organization because it was created after the First World War, together with the League of Nations, which failed, but ILO did not fail, and has set the international labor standard that have been adopted by many countries. I mean, it's more than a century old, and of course, it became part of the UN system when the UN was created. Health. For example, in terms of sicknesses, the elimination of smallpox or the management of the COVID-19 pandemics in terms of international action, let's say, that's another achievement, let's say. Gender equality. The Beijing summit established, which has been reproduced through time. Actually, when I was in head of DESA, still gender was part of DESA. Now, of course, it's UN Women, which have done also an excellent, but particularly the standards that have been set by the United Nations. Let me, I mean, we could go on. I mean, the issue of LDCs has been mentioned, the least developed countries. And the support to the least developed countries is actually also a very important role. Actually, the committee that you mentioned that I chair, the Committee for Development Policy, is in charge of the support for the least developed countries. And I think it has done a good job trying to organize the support for the LDC, the standards that they have to be given. I mean, I could go, associated to conventions, for example. Now the United Nations negotiating the UN Tax Cooperation Convention, which is a very important. Hopefully, it will be a very important achievement. Actually, because the OECD really failed in trying to set the global standards through the OECD inclusive framework. And that's why the African Union proposed that the UN will take care of them. And I must say, even in the case of the the Committee of Experts on Taxation of the United Nations has also a long history, which is quite effective. For example, in terms of bilateral tax agreements, there are the model that has been designed by OECD and the model that has been designed by the United Nations, which is the one that developing countries prefer and has been more widely used, for example, than the OECD agreement. Let me say also very peculiar things that people ignore, but since I was in charge of them when I was in the United Nations, it's quite impressive. Population. I mean, when you see the statistics on population, understand they are United Nations. The United Nations is the one that estimates the world population, the trends in the world population, etc. And very importantly, has supported the population censuses of many countries, particularly the poor countries. So that's another interesting achievement. And one that people will probably ignore, but I always underscore, statistics. The statistical standards are set by the committee, or the Commission of Statistics of the United Nations, where they say the heads of statistics of the world meet annually at the United Nations, and the major standards in statistical measurement are approved in that commission. It's actually, for example, people, I mean, let me take economists. I mean, we all the time, talk about a gross domestic product, gross national product, the national accounts. The national accounts were designed by the United Nations and are the subject of persistent changes. I mean, you can continue in many other areas. And let perhaps, since I insisted very much on that for our document, decolonization. I mean, most countries of the world, most developing countries were colonies when the United Nations was created. I mean, essentially the only group of countries that were independent were the Latin American countries, which of course played a very important role. For example, the creation of ECOSOC was actually because in the original design, it was not going to be an independent organ, let's say, but it was, in a sense, it was called Committee of the General Assembly. So the ECOSOC is, is one of the main organs of the United Nations because of the Latin American pressure. Anyway, so the colonization was a major achievement of the United Nations. So much that the Trusteeship Commission, the trustee room, how it's called, now is essentially used by ECOSOC because it actually achieved the purpose of guaranteeing that colonization finished. Anyway, that's a set of achievements I think is much. And let me just mention finally one point that I find very, very important, which is the openness to civil society of the United Nations. So not only member states, but civil society. When you think of, for example, of many things, for example, gender equality issues, they were, promoted by, the women's movements, and then adopted by the United Nations, let's say. Or the environmental standards. Many were also part of the civil society agenda that the United Nations adopted. So that openness to civil society is a very impressive characteristic of the United Nations. For example, the Bretton Woods institution have been totally unable to compete, let's say, in that regard with the United Nations. I mean, I could continue, but I think for the time being, I can finish my presentation. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was really a very broad overview. And as you hear, there is more and more and more. So I think there are many achievements, and that's an important thing to remember. Also, one short shout out, because Professor Ocampo mentioned the development agenda currently at the SDGs and the predecessor framework were the MDGs. And Professor Michael Doyle is sitting in the audience, who will moderate our third panel. And Professor Doyle was called by Kofi Annan, Secretary General, to actually write the MDGs based on the Millennium Declaration. So maybe he'll has a chance to talk about that later, though his focus will be different. The last but by no means least panelist on is Damaris Herrera Salazar, who is a Master of International Affairs candidate at CIPA, but that is by far not all she is. She, as a development practitioner, she is a researcher focusing on economic inclusion, sustainable development, and climate governance. And for 5 years, she has worked in Peru for UNDP. She has a lot of hands-on experience. In addition to that, in addition to being an economic inclusion specialist, she also was a researcher. She collaborated with universities on the intersection of rural livelihood, climate governance, and global value chains. Damaris, thank you so much for being here. Young professionals are often both idealistic and hopeful about the role of the UN, but also blunt and impatient with the bureaucratic red tape and the idea that big words but no impact. As I mentioned, you have worked 5 years for UNDP in Peru. From your perspective, are there any concrete, tangible achievements and impacts of the work of the UN that you recall?
Yeah, well, first, thank you so much for this invitation. I'm so honored to be with these amazing panelists. Yeah, the first thing I want to state is that, as the report mentioned, we have been doing a lot with very limited funding in the country offices. And this is not new. This is not the start with the budget cutting. This is even when I entered UNDP in 2020. But in face of the situation, we have been harnessing the unique abilities that UNDP has, that is to forge and create alliances in the territories. So I want to highlight one tangible achievement in my area. I used to work for the Prosperity Reduction Poverty area. We have a beautiful project called Innovate Your Market, in Spanish, Innova tu Mercado, that in the middle of the pandemic, it aims to empower the digital and innovation skills for vendors in traditional markets. Traditional markets are like mercados that we call in Latin America. I mean, you go to these places and there are many vendors selling vegetables, fruits, so you can choose what you want. But the big problem in the pandemic, it was the contact. They don't have digital skills in that moment. So we have I remember $50,000 to start this project. That was one of the one of the main spaces where the virus spread. So what we do is we create a platform with 80 local stakeholders in the territory who are interested in digitalization of these markets. I mean, since universities, local innovation spaces, the local and regional and national governments. So that $50,000 that we have at the beginning, that we start with one market, with all these actors, it leveraged more than $2 million with providing training, providing many kind of technology to this kind of markets. We amplified the project in 7 regions in Peru, in more than 3,000 vendors and 40 markets around the country. So what I want to say is that we really work hard and we try to leverage this power that UNDP has in that moment. You can go to a local government and you can knock the door and say, I'm UNDP, I want to work with you, and they will answer you. But if you go by yourself, it will not be, it will be very unlikely that they answer you very fast. So I think this is the power that UN has in the territories to harness, to empower the stakeholders and the capacities that are already in the territory. UN is not going to a place to bring development, but to unlock and connect the actors that what they are already doing and the capacities that already exist in the territories. So other things that we can say is, as also the report mentioned, we have been influencing in the in the local and regional and national policies. Especially want to highlight how we have include many policies to address deforestation, climate change is one of the main objectives as UNDP that it has an environment area. So, for example, there are public financial mechanisms. You are a smallholder farmer organizations and you want to access to a public finance. So we include in this public finance mechanisms environmental criteria in order that from the government and also from the smallholder farmers, they can also include in their business models ways to conserve the forest, if you are working with cocoa, if you are working with coffee, and also this is how we start, including this approach to make sustainable businesses in smallholder farmers. Also, I think we have been promoting more participatory governance models. What happened in many developing countries is the lack of connection that exists between the state and the local communities. And I think their agencies as UNDP has the power to connect this state with the local communities. We made a beautiful strategy, entrepreneurship strategy for indigenous communities. And we connect the Ministry of Agriculture and also the representative of indigenous federations, and they co-designed this entrepreneurship strategy that it was at the end for them. So the idea is how we do that. We did that. This connection between the local communities and the national government. Finally, I just want to enhance. That also UN has a very interesting program to leverage finance through the private sector. I think that's very important because private sector is an important development local stakeholder. We have a tool called Investor Maps, and this tool tries to prioritize where are the specific areas where the state can need investment. So we connect and align with the private sector priorities.
Thank you so much. And you can see from the global aspects of development achievements we have heard by our previous speakers, Damaris has been able to bring this down also to the country level and her direct experiences. And if I hadn't looked at her sharply, she could have gone on for probably many more minutes, because there is a lot of things that if you actually dig in that are achievements. Thank you for sharing that. And just being a little mindful of the time, because we have at some point to stop to make change for our climate change aspects, and we do want to engage in a second round of discussions. So I'd like to encourage everybody to be as succinct as you can. Starting again with Ambassador Harish. Ambassador, 10 days ago at Colombia, at CIPA, we had the Colombia-Indian Economy Summit, a quest for developed India. India is not just a recipient of projects. India is a donor country. You engage in many different aspects on development. We have seen that, and you mentioned that yourself in your initial remarks, that ODA, Official Development Assistance, is going down. What does it mean for the UN system? How does funding, what funding do we need? What is the role of the UN? You mentioned already that UNDP and the UN pillar are more or less successful, but what do we need to reform? What still needs to be done to actually be more effective, have a more impact, or is it all perfect?
I think as far as the development pillar is concerned, as nothing is ever perfect. It's always a work in progress. But one thing is clear. We just had our co-panelists refer to ECOSOC. ECOSOC is a principal organ of the United Nations, on par with the General Assembly and the Security Council, which are also principal organs. The intent of the framers was the peace and security pillar would primarily be the responsibility of the Security Council. And as a principal organ, ECOSOC's primary responsibility would be focused on the development pillar. However, over the years, I think development shifted increasingly towards the General Assembly. And a lot of the policy guidance from member states and a lot of the engagement that we see at a multilateral level on the development pillar has come from the General Assembly and less from the ECOSOC. ECOSOC commemorates this year the 80th anniversary of its existence. I think there is a case to be made for us to revisit how effective the ECOSOC has been as a principal organ of the United Nations, how much of a role it has had in shaping development policy, how effective it has been in coordinating the development aspects of the General Assembly and the various funds and programs across the UN. Broadly, the question of resources is vital. I think we live in an era of shrinking resources. If you were a decision maker in a global south country with limited scale, I think clearly the messages that you're getting is to do more with less. Climate finance is a mirage in terms of the requirements required for a just transition and the actual resources available. We also see increasingly, yes, we have had the FFD4, a very successful outcome in Sevilla last year, but again, resources. In practical terms, what are the resources that are available for sustainable development? What is the current success rate of meeting our 2030 agenda goals? What is the overall plan for the post-2030 period? I think there is a lot of ambiguity and lack of clarity on these issues. As the UN goes through a change of the Chief Administrative Officer, the Secretary General, as member states deal with a state of permanent crisis, more or less, that we have seen from 2020, starting with the pandemic, and then the many conflicts in Ukraine, in the Middle East, that we have seen. I think it's a very tough call because supply chains are broken. I think increasingly supply shocks are being felt across the board. Food, fuel, fertilizer, and energy and food security is really impacting every country. And I think the development pillar takes precedence. Will we see effective multilateral cooperation to tackle this? That is certainly the hope. But I think if we won't magically get there, we need strong cooperation and collaboration, and let's hope that everyone will work for that endeavor.
Thank you, and I personally thank you for all the work that you are doing to push the global community, meaning member states, right, who have a lot of the cards in their hand in this regard, and to do the right thing. Thank you so much for that. Karima, in our report, we have several recommendations on the role of country teams, the relevant coordinator, about streamlining plans, etc. You have served as our resident coordinator in Malaysia, and now you steer the efforts on sustainable development at the global level for the SG. How do you assess some of the recommendations we're making? And I asked Ambassador Harish also about the future role of the UN for development. Do you see the need for a reset on development?
Thank you. Thanks. It's a great question. And I think it feeds into the broader conversation because, again, what we've heard from Damaris on really the action on the ground and where the impact is. And I spoke earlier about those stories. Are we telling them in the right way? Are we, showcasing where the impact has been on the life of a community or a family or larger? And I think this is the beauty of the UN, is really the combination of all those levels, right? You see the change at an individual's, life level, and you see it at a, mega large, convention, legally binding instrument that allows for things to happen with accountability and in line with the charter. At the country level, because that's where development delivery happens. I mean, there is no way we can say development happens, in headquarters. Development happens at the community level, and of course we're dealing with governments and we're dealing with the entire, country, not the member state as a government, but different components, civil society, academia, young people, women's organizations, all of those that the UN have somehow engaged with or made possible mechanisms of engagement. At the country level, it becomes more evident. You have to do it because there's no way out. If you go to a community and you want to develop, and support, small holders, then you have to engage at the local level. The resident coordinator system serves as that gateway to action at the country level. And I was just listening to the Deputy Secretary General earlier, and she was saying he's the gateway or she's the gateway, not the gatekeeper. Right? That's the entry point to the country level that allows for that interface between the stakeholders, government, non-government, with the UN at the country level. And for that to happen, some reform has already taken place. It has already taken place in terms of ensuring that we have a central framework that somehow encapsulates everything that the country has expressed as needs and what the UN has expressed as it can meet. And for that, it's the CFs, right? It's the UNSDCF, which is the UN Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework. And that document is at the very core of where we need to be to deliver for the country. And around that, you have the entire UN family or UN infrastructure or footprint, whatever we call them, but UN entities that have specific mandates and are there to deliver on specific issues. Policy, programs, sometimes projects, sometimes small projects that are scalable. And that whole architecture is part of the reform. And that presence is what allows us today to really, say proudly that we are able to link whatever agreements are happening at the global level, at the regional level, and how they trickle down for, a country to either leave no one behind. What does it mean for disability? What does it mean for young people? What does it mean for migrants? What does it mean for refugees? And all of that in a quite coherent system. As I said in the beginning, is just about explaining what is being delivered, how it is being delivered, and what the UN really does, without really, being too generic about it.
Not at all, not at all. Thank you so much, and I wish we had 2 or 3 hours more to discuss out of this, but this is just a teaser. Some of this is in the report, and some of these discussions will have to continue. Now to Jose Antonio Campo. In your opinion, and in about 3 minutes, what do we need to change to make the UN more effective and impactful when it comes to development outcomes?
Well, let me say to start with that there has been this discussion for a long time about the term was the Economic Security Council as a global coordination system. I never liked the term security for that. So actually, I think the best proposal on the table has been the creation of this, the Global Economic Coordination Council, which came out of a commission that took place around, I think, 2010, that was chaired actually by Professor Stiglitz. I was a member of that commission, and actually I was part of the idea to create this coordination. That's an intergovernmental organ to coordinate, in that area. Now, aside from that, let me say that there is the coordination among the agencies, including the Bretton Woods Institution, the World Bank, and the IMF, but also, and very importantly, the World Trade Organization, which should become a UN agency. Actually, the Bretton Woods are UN agencies. They don't quite recognize themselves as such, but they are. And I think the coordination actually through the financing for development process, starting with the first a conference which was at Monterrey 2002, the coordination has increased, and meetings taking place now on financing for development are precisely in that regard. Now, there is also, of course, the national coordination, but also the regional coordination, in which the regional commissions of the United Nations can play a very important role, and they do partly do so now in trying to coordinate the action of the UN. And let me finally make a small proposal, which actually, when I was Undersecretary, I proposed a peer review process for the goals of the United Nations in ECOSOC. They never approved the peer review concept, but they created the annual ministerial reviews, which became the voluntary national reviews. Now, they should cease to be voluntary. They should be national reviews, which not every country, but like every 2 or 3 years, countries come, like they come to ECOSOC now for the voluntary national reviews, and actually to try to see the follow-up from the country perspective. And one of the good things about those processes is that they are based on at the national level with work with of the United Nations, with the government and civil society, to try to see, to review whatever is the topic subject to review in that particular year.
Thank you so much. The last suggestions we will hear, and again I'll try to be succinct, is again from Damaris Herrera Salazar. So in your perspective, what are the core, most important priority things the UN needs to change to become more effective when it comes to development?
More general. Well, first, I think that the projects that we have, it has to be institutionalized. Like as I mentioned, we need to work with the local stakeholders, like to harness the innovation development system that already exists, because we won't be there forever. The idea is that the communities, the governments became more resilient, especially in these times with the public crisis. So they need to, we need to cooperate with them, and also with the governments and with the communities. I also want to highlight, like, sometimes the governments, there are not the political will that you expect, and many destabilization in the governments. I mean, my country has been 8 presidents in less than 6 years. So we need to work directly with the local organizations and with the communities. I mean, they are there, they always be there, and this is how we can work at the same time with the capacities that already exist in the territory, and also include local populations in the UN staff. This is what I will say. Like, we need more intersectionality inside UN.
Thank you so much. So please join me in thanking our fabulous panelists for sharing their insight, reflections, hopes, and suggestions. And now we make space for the next panel, which will be on the UN we must aspire to for a healthy planet, environmental and climate issues. Please stay with us as the next panelists come up.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? No. Hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Is this working? I can't tell. Well, I've got news for you. State of the World, 2026. It could be better. Okay. But you know, as bad as things are, they've never been perfect, and the human project requires constant attention. So that's our job. That's why students come to SIPA. That's why I'm at SIPA. My colleagues are at SIPA. That's why you do what you do, Parry as well. So this is what we have to do. Every generation has its challenges, and we have them right now. As I was actually just sitting over here listening to the previous panel, I was thinking about what about the United Nations really inspires me. And I looked at the covenant of the League of Nations, and it starts out in its preamble, the high contracting parties. But then you look at the preamble to the UN Charter, and it starts out, we the peoples of the United Nations. So the Charter starts out about people. It's about us and about everyone on this planet. And that's pretty remarkable. And of course, it has its roots going back to the United States Constitution that starts out, we the people of the United States. And these two institutions are important, and each one needs the other one. Now, this panel is here to discuss the UN we must aspire to for a healthy planet. And I've been engaged in this in a long time. I have some gray hair, so I think I can say this. For a long time, I was invited to the UN EP, I think in 1989, 1990 maybe, to scope out, this is the first meeting, to scope out a treaty on biodiversity conservation. It didn't go the way I would have liked, but it was inspiring to be part of that process. Then I was in, Jose Antonio mentioned the Earth Summit, 1992. I was there as an advisor to the United Nations. Again, very moving. Didn't quite do everything I would have liked, honestly. And then I've been involved with the World Health Organization on global health matters as well. So in a number of different areas. I've seen it work. I've seen it fall a little short. So we do have these two questions for all the panelists, which are partly, the first one is the same as we had in the previous session. The first one is, what has the UN done for us, meaning the peoples, that we can point to as accomplishments? Very important. You know, when I teach, I also emphasize successes because the failures stand out to us more. And you can't learn from failures as easily as you can learn from successes. So if we could understand when and why the UN works well, I think we could do better. And that gets to our second question that we'll come around to. So the first question I'm going to ask everyone is going to be, what would you note as being accomplishments of the United Nations? And I would love to start with Ambassador Aida Casamaliva. I hope I pronounced it reasonably well. Thank you. Who, if I just introduce you briefly, is the permanent representative of the Kyrgyz Republic to the UN since December 2021. She has also been Vice President of the UN General Assembly, Vice President of the Executive Board of UN Women, and Vice Chair of the Group of Landlocked Developing Countries, in addition to being a member of the Kyrgyz Parliament, and formerly a radio and TV journalist. So actually, you should be the moderator, because you would do it much better than me. But thank you very much. So tell us what you think, as a representative of a member state, what are the UN's great accomplishments in this area of a healthy planet?
Thank you very much, dear professor. It's a great honor to be here and go outside of UN. I'm just coming from another meeting. We have a very interesting process. We are interviewing candidates for future Secretary General. And it was Madame Bachelet and Mr. Grossi, so it's a huge process. And we're asking questions about the UN and about the future of UN. Kyrgyzstan is in the heart of Central Asia. I am ambassador of Kyrgyzstan, and climate, ecosystems, and biodiversity, and how we can save our planet. It's a very, very important question to Kyrgyzstan, and we have a leadership and expertise there because Kyrgyzstan is an author of the 11 or 10 mountains resolutions, International Mountains Day, 5 years of mountain actions, what can we do globally to save mountain ecosystems, to save our glaciers, and to how we can help more financial support to these questions. We have a group of friends at UN, but I want to say that I want to answer to your question. Yes, everybody is criticizing that UN is inefficient, but I don't think so. The great thing with UN and my colleague here from UNEP, UNDP, it's a system. So we create the COP. Yeah, it's conferences, and from COP to another COP, we see in the example of the mountains how we can go further and having more supporters, countries, and we are understanding, building how we can get this system and the steps to save our mountains ecosystems. We are chairing the LLDC, landlocked, Kyrgyzstan is a landlocked country, developing landlocked states. But I'm here for the my 4 years. And we started from the mountain, from group of mountains, landlocked, now chairing the landlocked group. And in 2027, we will be in the Security Council. And in being as a chair of the landlocked group, we started to work with 6 small island states, with Pacific island states, so a lot of islands around the world, and it's about the ocean. And during this process, I understand that we understand, and we always say about the interconnectedness of all systems. So it started from glaciers, and then ocean, sea level rise. So in every our discussions, in every our resolutions, we are moving forward how we can improve. It's a pollution of air. It's everything. It's catastrophes, climate catastrophes. How we can save it. But UN, it's a system. You know, you can go to UNDP country teams, you can go to the UNEP, you can go everywhere. Last month I was in Bolivia, another landlocked mountainous country. And then I can see, they can understand me, Kyrgyzstan. So what we are doing, what we are promoting, and how, in what funds, in what, where we can get money to support, to save, and how we can learn from each other. It's a collaboration. So UN is a collaboration. You mentioned the UN Charter that with the people, for the people. Yes, of course, I know that about the inefficiency. Now we are thinking about the reforms, UN80 reforms. It is how we can strengthen the system. So we have, for example, country teams. We have UNDP, we have UNEP, and we have country teams of every programs. We have agencies, and for UN now, it's coordination is very important. Coordination with among member states, and coordination between country teams and how on the ground program can act. And another thing is implementation. It's how we can implement and how we can find resources. Now everything is shrinking. It's our new challenges. Some of the countries don't want to pay, and so we don't have funds for climate programs. And that's why we are coming here. I want to also listen from you how we can find from the another funds money to support and to strengthen our system. And I want to tell more about how small states in our example. What we think how small states can strengthen the multilateral system. What is the multilateral system for us? But maybe later after other panelists.
Thank you very much. The UN is certainly a system, and the Earth is a system, and these two are interacting and mutually dependent upon one another. So the next person I'm going to turn to is Jamil Ahmad, who is the Director of Intergovernmental Affairs for UNEP in UN Environment Program in New York. There were so many acronyms, and people can speak them with such fluidity, but I can't. But that's one I know, so I had to interpret for the audience. He joined UN Environment in 2008, and before that, he was a career diplomat for Pakistan. Pakistan's playing quite a role in diplomacy right now. Wish you luck. And served in duty stations in Asia, Europe, and Africa. And he was also a lead negotiator of the Group of 77 in China for climate change under Pakistan's chairmanship in 2007. And that was all leading up to COP13 in Bali. So you've had this experience as a diplomat and now a UN EP insider. So you've got information that the rest of us don't really have. And I'd love to hear from you about what you think are some accomplishments in this area of a healthy planet by the United Nations.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in this distinguished panel and this distinguished audience. I think some of the experts and icons of the UN system spoke before me in the panel, and they explained how the UN has delivered and accomplished a lot in the fields of development, in the fields of political issues and others. Environment was a latecomer to the UN. When UN was established, even before UN, as ILO was established after First World War, UNEP or environment was not even on the agenda till 1974. And it was in 1974, during the Stockholm meeting, that UNEP was established. And since then, gradually, the environmental movement, as we call it, or the environmental diplomatic journey has evolved by leaps and bounds. After the summit after the meeting in Stockholm in 1974, we then had the Rio meeting in 1992, which gave birth to the 3 Rio Conventions, as we call it, the Rio Trio on Convention on Climate Change, Biodiversity, and Desertification. And slowly then, the architecture of environmental policy started to expand, both in scale and in diversity. We now have more than 500 multilateral environmental agreements. Some of them were directly linked to the work of UNEP, like the treaties on chemicals, the treaty on migratory species, the Montreal Treaty on ozone, and several others, the latest being the Minamata Convention on the use of mercury. And now we have added to that family by the Treaty on High Seas, the Treaty on Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, which is now under discussion for its final ratification and the secretarial arrangements. So all these have happened with the support of member states and with the facilitation of the multilateral system, the multilateral architecture that we have. In the process, to support these organizations, to support these agreements and to support these treaties, we have a very strong scientific base. defined by research organizations, by academia, by institutions like this. The IPCC is one example, which produces reports periodically. We have the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. We now have a third in that, which is the chemicals, related to chemicals. They work with member states. They work with international organizations to provide solid, credible scientific evidence, which is then placed before these governing bodies, before these policy-making bodies to make informed decisions, and then it passes on to academia for defining the narrative, how to put it, and then to media, who have then to put it to the public. So there is this ecosystem of environmental diplomacy, which is more elaborate, perhaps, than the ecosystem of other forms of diplomacy that we have, including, I would say, developmental, although that is much beyond. We are mostly working on voluntary funding. That is a challenge, but still, it's being dealt. The Environment Assembly of United Nations Environment Programme, which is called UNEA, is a universal membership body which meets every 2 years, and then it makes decisions, it makes declarations. One of the last important decisions that it took was to work for the development of a legally binding instrument on the plastics, especially on single plastic use. Unfortunately, the deadline set was end of 2024. We could not materialize that, but the work is still in progress, and we hope that we will have a treaty very soon on the use of plastics. Similarly, we are also working on a number of other issues. We work in partnership with the 3 conventions on biodiversity, on chemicals, on critical minerals, on air pollution, and several other issues that are, and of course, climate change being the most important one. So this is the answer to your question, that the work of environmental diplomacy has progressed instrumentally and by leaps and bounds. An important element of this journey is the inclusion of youth, the inclusion of other major stakeholders. Youth, because youth will be the most vulnerable to the impact of climate change. They have to live longer with what we have done wrong. And that's why it is important for us to include youth in the decision-making, in policy-making. We have a Youth Environment Assembly, which meets before the United Nations Environment Assembly. And throughout the year, we engage with youth at different levels in the regions, in country levels, and also, as I said, at the global level through our Environment Assembly. We appreciate and recognize the work of youth also through various ways. We have the Champions of the Worth Award for youth, for students, for activity in youth work, for being an advocate for sustainability, for being a supporter of environmental movement. And in the process, I must mention before I conclude, we have achieved a milestone through the advisory of the ICJ on climate and environment. And before that, the General Assembly declared the right to a clean and healthy environment as a human right. Water was already a human right. So all these, if you put these jigsaw puzzles together, you will see a very clear picture of environmental ecosystem, environmental diplomacy ecosystem, which is at the service of humanity, although we have many challenges, but this is working and delivering. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I was going to follow Daniel's lead and go on to my colleague, Professor Ben Orlov, but since Jamil was speaking of youth, I thought, well, let's cut right away to our other panelists. Aparajita, she just told me how I should pronounce her name. Aparajita Rao, and she also told me, Pari, by the way, she goes by Pari. She also told me that her name, if I remember correctly, means indefeatable. So, okay, we can't mess here with Pari. She's not going to let us do that. So let me just say a few things about Pari. She is climate change program manager at Perry World House at the University of Pennsylvania. She has extensive experience in climate finance and multilateral negotiations. For 3 years, she worked at the International Peace Institute, focusing on climate finance and supporting negotiations on behalf of small island states like Palau and the Maldives. And most importantly for us, I think, she has an MPA in development practice from Columbia SIPA. So, Pari, we've been hearing about youth. I think youth, they can get impatient, but mainly they tend to be very optimistic in my experience, and hopeful, and just eager to get out there and make things better. So I'm sort of curious, from your perspective, what do you see as the accomplishments of the United Nations?
Well, so I get to work at the UNFCCC, which is the Framework Convention on Climate Change, and as Jamil said, it's one of the largest issues that we have. One of the best things that I got from coming to SIPA is that I actually got to engage as a young person with the UNFCCC, because you have these blocks that exist. So I work with the small island states, and they usually need a little bit of help in trying to understand what's really going on with climate issues, finance issues, and I think that's where we get to come in, because we can go into all of these places. The UNFCCC has been great in that they've been open in trying to get stakeholders in. A couple of years ago, when we were in Dubai, my mom, I kid you not, came to a COP. She called me while I was in one of the negotiations, and she said, "Hey, Pari, I'm at your workplace." And this terrified me because I was hanging out with the ambassador for Palau at the time. And so I kind of texted her and said, "Mom, I'm at work, I'll text you later." But she sent me photos of herself inside COP. And this is one of the amazing things that the UNFCCC has done. I feel like I might have gotten a marketing degree from SIPA at one point, because that's what we've been good at. We've been good at advertising the issues that climate change bring, and it just brings so many more people into the fora. So last year, Brazil did a great job at bringing in a lot of indigenous folk, which was Brazil's big focus. And this year, when it's in Turkey and Australia, that's another one of their big focuses. It's to bring in indigenous peoples. So I feel like that's one of the really good things that the UNFCCC has achieved. But just another one, because I'm a huge fan of the Paris Agreement. This was a landmark agreement that happened 10 years ago. Last year was the 10th year. And sadly, one of the major pen holders dropped out of the Paris Agreement last year, the United States. And so up until now, though, the Paris Agreement has done a great job at being a bottom-up process through something called the nationally determined contributions, which allows countries to decide what they want to do with their climate change commitments. And so having that bottom-up process and having countries say that this is what I want to do voluntarily, and I know Professor doesn't like the voluntary bit of that, but voluntarily to commit to something openly and then be shamed when you don't do it at the UNFCCC is potentially one of the greatest achievements of the Paris Agreement. Now, is this something that we can do over time and we can continue to do? I don't know, now that the US has dropped out, but it was still an achievement when it happened, even though it's probably not possible in the geopolitical climate that we're in today. So I think that would be my contribution.
That's wonderful. Two things come to mind. The first one is I was at the Paris at the COP, and it was a quite celebratory and moving experience that the world could agree on anything. So we do pay attention that the United States has now withdrawn from the Paris Agreement. But did you notice that no one else has? So I think that's quite telling. The other thing your wonderful remarks reminded me of was this play called Kyoto.
Oh,
have you seen it?
I watched it with Sue.
Okay. It's a remarkable, wonderful play. I didn't think it was possible. Like, how could you have an interesting play about a UN conference of the parties? I mean, it seems impossible. It was actually a riot, and pretty accurate at the same time. So I'm delighted to now finally introduce my colleague, Professor Ben Orlov. Ben is a professor at SIPA. He's an anthropologist, the only anthropologist on our faculty, at least our tenured faculty. And he's conducted field work in mountain areas. I guess, I'm not sure of Kyrgyzstan, but
I've been to Kyrgyzstan several times. I've been to Naran, Isikol. Wonderful, wonderful.
Wow.
Amazing.
The faculty at SIPA are pretty cool. But he's worked, done field work in the Peruvian Andes since the 1970s and carried out research in East Africa, the Italian Alps. That's a tough job you have. And Aboriginal Australia. He was also a lead author of the 2019 special report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, on ocean cryosphere in a changing climate. So Ben, what do you see as being the great accomplishments of the United Nations?
So I thought, not knowing myself very well, that I would limit myself to one accomplishment. But with our discussion of Healthy Planet, I would like to say that the notion of a healthy planet is a significant contribution. It certainly draws on the indigenous peoples have been talking about the connection of humans and nature for millennia in a very different way than merely talking about, I don't know, public health indices, important as those are. I think we might have thought of a healthy world as a world with longer life expectancies and less disease. We certainly think about that, but it's through the UN that we see the interconnections of nature, of all the different species of humans. And so where we might have once spoken of healthy nations or a healthy world, we now speak of a healthy planet. And I think that's an even more profound notion of collectivity. And that actually leads to what was going to be the one thing I was going to talk about, to land on a single contribution. And that's our capacity to discuss climate change. That the United Nations has certainly done many important programs, and Pari has emphasized the nationally determined contributions, which really resolved a major dilemma of sharing the responsibility for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But it's through the United Nations Framework Convention and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that we're really able to see climate change for all the conversations to take place, the conversations that draw in the many communities that Damaris was talking about and throughout. So the UNF, I don't mean to quote UN documents extensively, but I am going to have two quotes, and the first is the goal of the Framework Convention to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that prevents dangerous human-induced interference with the climate system. Kind of complicated, but long, but it is saying there's a cause. It's the greenhouse gases. It could cause dangerous interference, and our goal is to prevent that. And so that is a single goal. There has been a focus on that. And consensus, let me say, that these are consensus agreements. Major step forward is to say there are really two pieces of climate change. One is the mitigation, reducing the emissions, and the other is the adaptation, which is coping with the already existing harms. So it moved forward to go from, well, at a level which was that would prevent dangerous. That was kind of vague. There was significant advance. We now know about 1.5 and 2 degrees as thresholds. So that is a lot that every country in the world could say yes to that. The Paris Agreement, as Pari explained, brought forward the nationally determined contributions on the mitigation side and also the national adaptation plans on the so that those who are finding ways to get all the countries to be doing something, and not just for a country to say, here's a document, we want to do something, but to review them, to organize them, to really assess progress. 2021 was when the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change finally got every country in the world to agree with this as the second statement. It is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. So you're thinking like, we knew that before 2021, the science knew that, but that did not mean that every single country would agree to that. There are countries that we never thought would get to agree with that, and it was quite a process. So that means that climate change is beyond a doubt. And I have to say that that word unequivocal is brilliant. They don't say it's true. They don't say it's certain, unequivocal. hugely important. And there are two new terms that have come forward in this global frame. And in a way, they're concessions that we have not reduced the emissions as much as we want. The rate of warming itself is accelerating from 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade to 0.3. That means we hit a new degree every 30 years rather than every 50 years, which is pretty uncomfortable, and that may be coming even quicker. So the two new terms, one is loss and damage. So if there's mitigation and adaptation, people like to say mitigation is avoiding the unmanageable, and adaptation is managing the unavoidable. Loss and damage is saying, look, there are things we can't avoid and we can't manage, and that's just, we're going to have to cope with the world where that happens. And that was one of the back and forth between the IPCC and the UNFCCC advancing on that. That means that claims for the extreme nature of climate change are visible in a way that they weren't before. Loss and damage, borrowed from insurance, claiming some sort of response. That was very powerful. The other term that's kind of newer is the word overshoot. The thought that if we're warming and we wanted to stop at 1.5, and certainly not, if we're going to pass that, it's not like, well, we tried, too bad, we give up, it's all over, we're going to, I don't know, burrow underground. No, it's saying, no, we want the curve to come back down. We continue to work on this. We know that if we spend some years at 1.8 or 2, that's going to be bad, but we have overshoot, we can reframe the goal. So the fact that we can have these conversations and that everyone takes part in them, I think is profound. And for all the discussion that we don't just want talk, I think that is the talk that has led immediately to solutions. I have a list of forms of action that I've seen around the world, but I think we've heard from those, and I would rather move on to the next session.
Well, just before we do, I do want to come back to this question: what has the UN done for us? Because the terms and the rest of it, that's all great, but what has it really done? So there are two ones I'm going to point out as being really important. Not the only two, but two that are really important. The Montreal Protocol, Jamil mentioned that, phased out something like 98, the exact number, of chemicals worldwide. These chemicals destroy ozone in the stratosphere. The ozone layer basically filters out, protects us from harmful ultraviolet radiation that would, we've evolved as humans and have the skin color we have in response to our exposure to UV radiation worldwide. And the destruction of the ozone layer basically puts us in great risk, and the predictions were for millions of deaths from ozone destruction. But because of the Montreal Protocol, every country is in it, including the United States still, by the way, and phasing out these chemicals worldwide. And as a consequence of this, the ozone layer will recover to its previous level around 2050, 2060. That's astonishing. We don't pay a lot of attention to it because this is a success about things that didn't happen but could have happened. So we don't pay as much attention to it. The other one I wanted to mention is, it was mentioned before, the eradication of smallpox. A truly magnificent achievement, because to do it, you had to eliminate smallpox every single part of the world at exactly the same time. The last man to have endemic smallpox was a man named Ali Maumoon, who lived in Somalia. He was infected in 1977. He was found, he was isolated, treated, and the people around him were vaccinated. The people around those people were vaccinated, and so on. And it's because of that that smallpox was eradicated worldwide. And it's because of that that most people, the young people in the audience, have never been vaccinated for smallpox. So that is an amazing achievement. And again, it took the success of efforts worldwide. So I think there are some accomplishments that really are staggering. At the same time, it's impossible to think we couldn't do better. So the next round of questions are really about what can we do, and the questions around the word reform, but really, are there concrete things that we could do that would allow the United Nations to work better? Ambassador, over to you. What can we do?
It's a very interesting conversation, and amazing how we are connected to each other. And for my heart, it's very important that young people should engage everywhere, especially UN. And this, I mean, framework, perception of UN, it's a pity that many questions why UN is very far for some people, but we should involve, and we need this creative view. Concrete steps. So I want to describe many processes now happening at UN, because it's a lot of conflicts everywhere. And 1 year, last year, it's on June 3rd, we will have elections to the Security Council, and for one seat, 2 countries, one big and one small. Small is Kyrgyzstan. And it's a very, difficult environment, and we are talking about this attack to the multilateral system, that we are losing multilateral system. What is a multilateral system? It's an international law, UN Charter, and campaigning and engaging with all groups, all 193 member states. I'm getting more and more information about how we are changing, what can save us, the system. For Kyrgyzstan, for small states, UN Charter and international law order and multilateral system is our only one protection system that can protect. And in every resolution, co-sponsoring or not co-sponsoring, involving, voting or abstain, it is very important for small states to show their principles, position, and also being together. That's why Security Council for us very important. You know how Security Council, we have 15 members of the Security Council, 5 members, we call them P5 with veto right, and 10 others, we call them E10. They're coming every 2 years, 5 countries. And yes, as a small country, you don't have this power as P5, but you can raise the questions, you can be together, you can create this arrangement. So the voice of small states and being together is very important. And also we are saying that that small states will be the voice. It's very important to be the voice of developing states. Also for Kyrgyzstan, it's very important to raise these development issues, climate and security, everything to the Security Council, and we should be very vocal. Concrete steps, it's your everyday routine. Every day, how your attitude, what your statements, your act as a co-sponsoring or creating resolution or saying no for something. But now we live in very interesting atmosphere. Really, we are losing the trust in the UN system. So we can say that some big powers can act, and then it's not they don't have an impact. No, they have an impact for everything. You know, it's UN now. You don't have a consensus anymore. I mean, consensus. It's very difficult. Every resolution, CSW, it's a Commission on Women's Status, and outcome documents. I'm a co-facilitator for high-level meeting for road safety. Even this question is also, I mean, it is voted, no consensus. And then in real life, you're coming to room with experts, your ambassadors, and you feel that the trust is very important and it's very fragile. So it is a very important question, I think, for us as a member states to save this trust and to save the multilateral system. It will save the planet. And I want to say about also about the women. Professor, you and the experts, you mentioned indigenous people, and I'm from mountain, and I grew up in a rural place in high mountains, and as an indigenous people, and women are very important in these ecosystems and in communities. They are saving. They care about the health, they care about the children, families, and clean water, everything. So we should, we are always involving local people, local communities, young people, and women. It is a crucial, and in my career also, that in the parliament, I am author of this quota for women parliaments. We have now 30% of quota, and women leadership is crucial. What I want to say that in this conversation, I want to deliver that many girls, young girls, women diplomats, female diplomats should come to UN and to participate in negotiations. In all negotiations, in peace negotiations, and we are promoting also the women leadership because of to the Security Council. In the Security Council should be more women ambassadors. It's not only representative being a women ambassador at the table. No, it's a substantive way. When you participating in negotiations. In every conflict, you will bring another perspective, and it is very important. And so it's also concrete steps to always to invite women. You know, our PGA President of General Assembly, Madam Annalena Baerbock, maybe she will come today, I saw her name, but now she's chairing this Q&A session with candidates to SG. So one of her concrete steps was inviting women ambassadors, women PRs, to co-facilitate very meaningful, important processes. Among 193 ambassadors at UN member states, only 40 for now. Still, we have only 40 women ambassadors, and we are not saying that you should be women, but it's crucial. To participate, to involve. About the SGs also, Kyrgyzstan is pushing for women SG, next SG. In 80 years of the history of UN, we didn't have a Secretary General, women Secretary General. Why not? Why not? And it's from Grulak. Today we had a conversation with Madame Bachelet from Chile. And we have Mr. Grossi from Argentina, and we will tomorrow Madame Greenspan from Costa Rica. It's a turn of Grulak now, and another candidates. And I hope that we will have a women Secretary General, Madam Secretary General next year. It will be very important and concrete.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, we're going to have some applause here. Wonderful. All right, no pressure, but we've got 10 minutes, and we have to solve the problems for how to make the UN even more effective.
Thank you.
Jamil, you're ready to go.
Yes, I heard you say no pressure. So, well, to say what we can do better, we have to first identify what is preventing us from doing better. The challenges that we face in the field of environment and climate is very evident. The main challenge is that climatic risks appear too distant, even with all the knowledge that we have, with all the scientific evidence that we have. So we know that it will bring consequences and impact. It's evidence. It's causing damage, it's floods, heat waves, there are droughts, there are landslides, there are deforestation, air pollution, all the things that we hear day in and day out. I mean, if you go back 30 years ago, a discussion like this would hardly include a mention of climate or environment. Today, there is no discussion without finding references, frequent, consistent, continuous references to climate, environment, biodiversity, all these things. So we have to relate these risks to everyday life. The success of the ozone was because of this reason, because people related to that risk, that it is an imminent danger to their lives. They will lose their eyesight, they will have problems with their skins. So the industry, scientific community, policymakers, and people, they came together to find a solution. So alternate to HFCs were discovered, technology, industry came up with different ways of doing it, they were avoiding CFCs, and we had a solution for ozone. That will have to be done for climate through the help of IPCC and others, but the role of, again, people themselves will be important to lend that helping hand to policymakers, to bring that influence upon them from the youth, especially again, because as I said, they will be the one who will be living longer with the consequences. So one success of the environmental diplomacy is the development of environmental law, which was not there. Today we have environmental legislation, we have environmental courts, we have environmental prosecutors, we have a strong arm in judiciary dealing with the environment, and we have strong environmental law sections in all universities. This was not the case 2 decades ago. So we have more stronger base to work, but we will need strong support from the field, because while policy is developed at the top, action is at the ground. And at the ground, it is young people, it is academia, it is youth, and it is indigenous people, as they say. When they come together and bring the ecosystem into play, we will have we will do things better.
Wonderful. Now, Pari, the undefeatable. No pressure. What can we do to change the UN, how it does its business, to ensure that we have more of these positive results that actually affect people's lives as opposed to just a bunch of words?
Well, I want to go back to something that Professor Nauyok said, which is that we try to see what's wrong in a system. We don't try to look at what's right. And so I think, and I'm going to use the Paris Agreement as an example. I had to write this down. So preserve, strengthen, and supplement. Those are the three things. So we preserve what we have done so far. We shouldn't have any backsliding on the progress that we've made. I'm sure that we are going to overshoot, and we technically have, but at least whatever we've done so far, whatever financial commitments are there, we as people who are voters have to push our governments to make sure that there is no backsliding. So preserve what we have. The second one is strengthen. So there are a lot of ideas that sit inside something like the Paris Agreement, the NDCs, the NAPs, the National Adaptation Plans. Again, these are things which we help to construct. Because when we do things as locals, when we try and help our governments, especially whereas cities are concerned, a lot of that data that comes, it comes from us. So those contributions that we make as universities, as participants, as data collectors, all of that matters. And so you strengthen things like that, strengthen the things that you can focus on right now while the political situation is a little iffy. And then the last thing is supplement. So most of the Paris Agreement and most of the UN in general, it's very state-centric. It doesn't think about the subnationals, the private sector, all of us little people sitting here. It doesn't think about us. It doesn't involve us in any of the decision-making. And so to be able to give us power, that is something that people are now starting to call mini-lateralism. So you think about the blocks that Ambassador referred to, the small island states, the LLDCs, so the landlocked developing countries, the LDCs, the least developed countries. Those guys have a lot of power because they're small countries going in and making bold statements. And so listen to them, support them, advertise the things that they say. So that's my first one. My second one was actually a recommendation that was in the paper, which I really, really liked, which I think Professor Ocampo referred to. It was recommendation 7.6, the UN Global Economic Cooperation Council. That's bringing in the World Bank, the IMF, and the WTO more into the process. The Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage actually did this. It named and shamed the World Bank, and so the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage now has a home inside of the World Bank. There's this big, the climate action plan that's inside of the World Bank right now, which goes up for a change in June. And so if you are able to go to your congressmen, your senators, and let them know that the United States has a vote, India has a vote, Ambassador Harish was here, China has a vote. If we can continue inside of the World Bank to have some sort of a climate action pledge, then you'll still have money, it's about 60% right now, that goes towards climate action. So I mean, this is a great recommendation, and I really hope people continue to do it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's wonderful. I just had an emergency request here. So, Ben, I'm doing the math. You have 3 minutes, and then Jamil will get 30 seconds, and I will just say thank you to everyone.
So as someone who grew up in New York, I can talk really fast and get a lot of syllables in. It's not that I have some secret great thing that you could do that you've been waiting for. They all had ideas, but wow. I mean, we're hearing a lot about finance, a lot of coordination, and a lot about strengthening, and those all make sense. And I think one of the themes perhaps that comes forward is the theme of inclusivity and the fact that the voices from below are strong, that if we're seeing inefficiency, we're also seeing new forms of mobilization, have certainly seen that across the trajectory of the climate conferences. I've attended both the COPs and the IPCC meetings, and there are greater variety of representatives, and they're bringing forward stronger pressures, and those are creating responses. So I think there are a lot of very specific things we're seeing. The oceans, you could say, oh, it's just the experts who are saying we understand the chemistry of the oceans as a carbon sink. It's also the small island states that are pressing for that, and the high mountain countries that are realizing that as the glaciers are melting, where is that water going? That's also affecting the oceans. So I see that kind of inclusivity, and I'm happy to cede my remaining sections.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Those of us who have attended UN meetings would agree with me that someone who says, I will be brief, Mr. Chairman, he makes the longest statement. So 30 seconds, I said, right? Yeah. Sorry, I will be short. I'll be brief. We heard the word overshoot quite a few times today. And there's the World Overshoot Day. Have anybody heard of that? So the World Overshoot Day is the day on which we living on the planet exhaust the natural resource budget of the planet for the year. That is because we are consuming these natural resources at a pace which is much faster than the regenerative capacity of the planet itself. And for that, we will need not only policy change, but we will need behavioral change. And that behavioral change will begin with us. I always give this example. During COVID, when I was living here by myself, I did not change my jacket for 6 months because I was on the video, on the laptop, attending meetings. So one tie, of course, you have to change shirts, but the same jacket. So if we can live with that for 6 months, we can live with smaller amount of clothes, smaller amount of food, to do more with less. So my plea to the young people is to own the motto of sustainable consumption and production. This is SDGs also, and try to be an advocate for sustainability by telling our friends, our colleagues, our families, and our people to live within the limits of the planet's natural boundaries. Thank you. I hope I was brief.
So thanks to everyone. Live within the limits. I think that we definitely have to do that. We also have to live within the time frame, and I promised my colleague Michael Doyle, who's chairing the next session, that we'd end at 7:10, and Michael at 7:10 and 19 seconds. Thank you, everybody, so much.
Let me thank everyone here for joining us for this third panel. My name is Michael Doyle. I teach at SEPA, the law school, and the political science department. I once had the great privilege of working for Kofi Annan as his special advisor and assistant secretary general for policy planning, and then working for Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to chair the UN Democracy Fund for a few years. But I'm not one of the important panelists here, and I'm going to introduce those who are. We are truly honored to have the President of the General Assembly, Her Excellency Annalena Baerbock, seated immediately to my left. She is the former Minister of State for Foreign Affairs of Germany and one of the leaders of the Green Party within Germany. So she has a truly distinguished career. I won't go into it in more detail. You'll find more material in the program in front of you, but we're so pleased to have her here. Immediately to her left is His Excellency Ambassador Brian Wallace, the permanent representative of Jamaica to the United Nations. He has a distinguished career as a lawyer practitioner in Jamaica, elected to the Senate. He then joined the diplomatic service. And as part of his work, he is now the co-chair of the Working Group on Mandate Implementation Review, an extremely important job that you have undertaken. And before that, in 2022, he was the co-facilitator of the Declaration on Future Generations, which makes my next introduction so appropriate. Here from one of those future generations is Miss Anushka Joshi. She is a second-year MIA candidate here at SEPA, focusing on international security and UN studies. She's worked as an intern at the U.S. mission to the UN, done research for the UK government in the Middle East while at Columbia's Amman Center, and completed a capstone project on special political missions. And we'll be hearing from each of the three in turn. Let me start by noting that these are difficult days for the UN. The P3, the most powerful members of the Security Council, the US, Russia, and China, have become basically rogue states, undermining the UN Charter's global order that they are pledged to protect. Clearly, this touches on one of the important challenges identified in the excellent report that you have in front of you, which is to restore authority of the UN Charter and limit the use of force in interstate relations. Much the opposite is occurring. The Trump administration has cut $4 billion from its UN contributions and withdrawn from 31 UN agencies. It has bombed, is blockading. Temporarily, we have an extended truce for a short period of time, but if that fails, may soon even be invading Iran. Equally, but not as severe yet, it is because of effective pushback from the Europeans, it has threatened old and valued allies, including Denmark. Mr. Putin from Russia is still ravaging Ukraine, and President Xi continues his ongoing efforts to annex the South China Sea and threaten Taiwan with invasion. The rest of the UN, it has to be said, has been able to do next to nothing to stop them, for the obvious reason that the Charter gives the P3 the right to police themselves with a veto over serious sanctions. This leads me to want to pose two questions to this wonderful panel in this, our third session. The first is, given these difficult times and the severe challenges in peace and security that I've just mentioned, and that list could go on much, much longer, the question is, what underappreciated accomplishments are we in danger of forgetting when we review the UN's many activities? That's the first question. And then after a round of a few minutes from each on each of those, given this deadlock that I've described at the top of the UN with the P3, Canadian Prime Minister Carney suggested that the middle powers need to step up to provide some of the legal, ethical commitment and the leadership that the protection of the global order seems very much to need. So those are the two questions. I'll turn to President Baerbock in just a moment to have her address what we might call the forgotten accomplishments. And in this difficult times, they're easily forgotten of the United Nations. President Baerbock, the floor is yours.
Good evening, and thank you for the invitation. We just came out of the United Nations, where we heard the first of the candidates for next Secretary General. And in my opening remarks, I said a similar line as you have in your report. It's probably the toughest job in the world, and therefore it is also mostly important that for this job, where the next Secretary General is serving 8 billion people, we have a chance to hear from him or her what they are standing for. And if you asked about the positive side of the United Nations, one thing is these kind of job interviews. I was yesterday in the late night show, and I think many people thought it was a joke when I said you can hear tomorrow the job interview live on UN Web TV, the questions for 3 hours by 193 member states. Probably it's forbidden by many countries' laws to have job interviews being broadcasted normally. But this kind of transparency, yeah, it sounds like such a simple thing, but this is truly unique in the international world, that we are saying an organization serving 8 billion people from all around the world in all its diversity has to have an understanding that everybody can really see and hear what we are doing. Unfortunately, in these times, not many people watched it. I don't want to ask who watched it from you inside this room here, but you can see it later. Yeah. I also told the candidates in their answers this will be taped. Yeah, so if we will be asked in 3 years' time again what you said there. But in these times where hate clicks 6 times better than good news, where journalists report about the wars going on, what they should report about, but also about so-called scandals, especially as a woman, if you wear the wrong shoes, this can be a scandal, but hardly speak about the successes of the UN every day. I mean, this is the biggest success story. 26 million children would not go to school, literally, if we would not have UNICEF. 125 million would literally die now in this second if we would not have the World Food Program. Smallpox, I had to learn that from German language into US and English, but also maybe younger generation, you don't even know what this is, because we could get rid of it in the world, because in 1956 there was a convention and there was a work from the United Nations, so it was eradicated in 1980. Yet we see today, if we would not have this work of the World Health Organization anymore, I think you have a debate in your country about it, yeah, if you would not have vaccination going on, that these kind of diseases could come back. We could only fight the pandemic all together, because at the end, unfortunately, also the country where I'm coming from, it was not ready in the beginning to distribute vaccination all over the world. It needed the UN via the World Health Organization to ensure that we had vaccination doses all over the world, because no single country, even if you vaccinated all your people in an interconnected world, could fight this pandemic. And this underlines so strongly that if a virus doesn't have a passport, it won't stop at the border and doesn't hold for the strongest army. Same for CO2 emissions. You can ignore it. You can pretend that this is fake news, but for the climate crisis, it just hits at this very moment. So all these crises, we can only fight together. And I would say even the point you mentioned in the beginning, and speaking on behalf of 193, obviously on all the member states, I have to be very diplomatic, but what we are seeing right now with regard to the Strait of Hormuz, that in a situation of ships not coming out of the Strait of Hormuz, in an interconnected world, the effects are being felt everywhere around the world. So there is no isolated crisis anymore. And again, we hear also there the calls now from the US to open the Strait of Hormuz, asking other partners to help in this regard. So obviously also with regard to peace and security, we can only do it together. And this is why we are representing two different, so the President of the General Assembly, the Ambassador, my dear friend Brian here as well. Our call for the support of the United Nations is also a call in self-interest, because no single country in the world could sleep in silence in the future if we would accept that the Charter and the UN is under constant attack, which we are seeing right now, because it's indeed our life insurance.
Thank you very much for those comments. And the fact that real people's real lives are being saved daily is something that cannot be forgotten. And some credit for that has to go to the United Nations and its work in the member states that support it. So thank you for that remark. Ambassador Wallace, what would you identify in this difficult world for accomplishments that are sometimes often forgotten in this media environment in which we live?
Thank you so much. I join President Baerbock in thanking you for the invitation to have this exchange with you. It's an important exchange because of the context that you just outlined. I'm going to give you a very cliched response. The fact of the matter is that if the United Nations did not exist, we would have to invent it. And so its greatest accomplishment is its very existence. Imagine a world where there is no forum in which the conversations that are being had, that reflect disagreements, that seem to conflict with the norms that we have come to know, to deepen, to rely on. Imagine a world where there is no space for a dialogue among 193 member states. That would be chaos. The fact that we have this convening power, a place where as much as we disagree with each other, as much as we have different opinions and views on whether or not these norms remain relevant, or whether or not the rule of law is as relevant today as it was in 1945. The fact is that everybody shows up at this table to have these conversations. Without those conversations, we're back in the Wild West. And that, I repeat, would be chaos. We could sit here for hours and talk about the various individual, minute things that we all take for granted that the UN does effectively and efficiently day by day. The naming of the streets in every country in the world has to be coordinated. Flights have to be regulated. Cross-border trade has to be regulated. Communications by telephone, spectrums, all of these things have to be regulated. Who do you think is doing all of that? These are the unseen things that make our day-to-day lives functional, that the UN does without any fanfare. And those are critical to our quality of life. So there are minute things, mundane things, but then there are big things. Jamaica just suffered the most devastating hurricane, partly attributable to climate change. In our history, certainly, and the third most powerful in recorded history globally. The first point of response to that disaster was the United Nations. UNDP and UNOPS and OCHA were there on our doorsteps the very next day. In fact, they were there with us in preparation for this. There is nowhere else, there is no other institution that can bring together expertise and resources that can assist any country in the world, not just in one region, But any country in the world that is faced with that kind of situation, there is no other organization that has the capacity to be responsive to that. So the UN is necessary. Is it due for upgrade? Absolutely. Do things need to change? Yes. Do we need to become more effective by becoming more efficient and therefore have more impact on the ground? Absolutely. Are we working on it? Yes, we are.
Ambassador, thank you very much for those remarks. You know, if it didn't exist, we would have to invent it. I think that's a very powerful argument, and both of you agree on that statement as well. One question I've sometimes posed to my students as a hypothetical, starting out with the premise that your statement is convincing, is could we invent a UN as capable, as coherent with all of its limitations, as was done in 1945 in San Francisco if we started today? And I think it would be a hard answer to come up with a yes, even with everyone agreeing with exactly your comment that we absolutely need to do so. So it's,
you know, what we also have to remember is that in 1945, in San Francisco, there's a lot of paper that was left on the cutting room floor.
Yep.
Not everything was agreed then either.
Yes.
And not everybody got everything that they were looking for. So disagreements. If I were to ask every one of you now whether you thought, I don't know, jaywalking should be a crime, I guarantee you we will not have consensus on that simple issue in this room.
especially not from Columbia students. It has.
Maybe I shouldn't have picked jaywalking, but because this is New York City. But you get the point. The fact that there are disagreements is not a reason to say the institution is useless. Far from it.
Great.
The fact that we're able to have those disagreements is the value.
Yes, great, thank you. Anushka, what would you add if you were pressed to say, as a representative of future generations and young generations today, what we would point to if we were looking to describe, an accomplishment, a serious accomplishment of the UN?
Thank you for your question. I think as the youth panelist here, I would say that a landmark achievement has been the fact that for the first time, young people are being recognized as equal participants within the multilateral fora. And I think this shift, profoundly began with the Declaration on Future Generations within Pact for the Future that's really, established a very critical normative foundation for intergenerational governance within the UN system. And it's been wonderful to see these norms being operationalized within UNGA 80 under the presidency of Her Excellency Ms. Baerbock, particularly with the first ever high-level General Assembly meeting on youth that took place in September 2025. And I think that especially in today's context, the increased participation of youth in UN and multilateral spaces becomes paramount. For example, the global median age today is 31 years old. And, taking into account both civilians and combatants, the average age for those who are dying in modern wars is in the mid-20s. Not to mention that young people are uniquely positioned to play key roles in both peace building and peacemaking. We've seen young people harness social media as a key tool for digital activism, leveraging forms of innovation. For example, we have young people across Africa that are developing and implementing agricultural technologies like drought-resistant crops to combat global food insecurity. And then, of course, just with young people having this elevated spirit and enthusiasm, really being able to foster just trust and reconciliation and unity in conflict-affected spaces. I think one of the critical manifestations through which we're seeing this today is through the role of sports, where young people have really been a driving force in just fostering social integration, empowering one another, cultivating this sense of national identity. And I think that in addition to these frontline roles, for those of us at SIPA who are aspiring to be this future generation of change makers, I think our role will very much focus on how we can continue to shape these institutional and normative frameworks that underpin these efforts. And this does require not only just an in-depth understanding of, but also a keen appreciation for the UN and the multifaceted aspects of its work. So I will conclude my response with a personal insight. Growing up, I felt like I had a very specific specific niche. I myself come from a UN family. I attended the UN International School. I worked at the US mission to the UN for 2 years, and here I am specializing in UN studies at SIPA. So, each of these experiences has really reinforced to me the value of the UN and the impact of its work. And coming to SIPA, I was extremely motivated to find myself just amidst a community of such like-minded individuals who share that commitment for the UN, whether or not this is on the peace and security pillar, humanitarian efforts, sustainable development. And I think that all this to say that it is this exact sense of passion and perseverance that is required for the future generations to really carry the torch forward and revitalize the spirit of multilateralism, especially in today's complexities and uncertainties.
Great. Thank you so much for that. I mean, it's literally the case that for people my age, what we're doing now is for people your age to inherit a better planet than the one that we're right now about to hand over to you. So that's a serious challenge, and it's great to hear the enthusiasm with which you'll undertake the task as we move ahead. As an academic, the only thing I would add to these very insightful remarks is that there's something special about the UN Charter, sort of normatively. It's the first time in international history that the use of force has been unequivocally condemned, not just the use of force, but the threat of force, with the proviso that it can only be legal in self-defense or with the approval of the UN Security Council. The Kellogg-Briand Pact was just paper in 1928. It prohibited war as a matter of policy. Every state turned around and said, oh, this is not just a policy choice, we need to use force. And the UN Charter closed that huge loophole normatively, and that's pretty significant. The only other thing I'd add to the wonderful list is peacekeeping. It's radically criticized, and we know all the failures, Rwanda, Bosnia before 95, and we could go down the list one after the other. But there's careful statistical studies by political scientists that show that the deployment of peacekeepers, even when there's no peace, reduces casualties, given what would otherwise occur. And the treaties that are signed have a much better chance of being effective if there's a peacekeeping, peace-building mission on the ground. That's despite all of the problems we're well aware of. So I think we've chalked up a bunch of accomplishments. But unfortunately, when we look around, we see the state of global peace, law and order, and security is not good. And as I mentioned, Prime Minister Carney of Canada gave a very good speech at Davos a year or two ago. And he said that given this deadlock amongst the superpowers, the great powers, it's time for the middle powers to step up. And it was a good idea, but immediately there's a lot of skepticism. What are the middle powers going to do when the elephants are out there dancing in the grass, ripping up the grass? And it was a reasonable ground for suspicion. But I think we could say it's not pie in the sky, not purely utopian. In the trade area, the multi-party interim agreement on arbitration has found a way around the U.S.'s attempt to deadlock the WTO by refusing to appoint judges on the appellate body. A number of quite small countries, economically, on their own negotiated the fisheries subsidies agreement, and none of the big trading states were party to that. That was all done by smaller and middle powers. If we look at peace and security, in Europe today, European leaders, inspired by President Stubb of Estonia, Chancellor Merz of Germany, and others, are trying to create a Europeanized NATO. That is a NATO that could function even when the U.S. is absent without leave, AWOL. So there are efforts in this direction. And the question I'd like to pose to our panelists, especially to President Baerbock and Ambassador Wallace, and then a more specific question for Anushka, is can the middle powers step up to fill the gap that have been created by the P3 when it comes to securing and promoting the first aim of the UN, securing peace for our future generations? President Baerbock.
They can and they have, and they should, because the UN was built for them and for the smaller states. Because, I mean, the P5, especially those, I mean, we should also not forget those with nuclear weapons. Yeah, it's not only about the veto, it's also about nuclear weapons, so the strongest weapon in the world. The idea was that they have a special responsibility, but they have also the veto, and they have the nuclear weapons. So obviously, it's not built for them, but it's built for the whole rest. And in a situation where the charter is, and I had to correct myself, when I started in September, I said the UN is under pressure, the charter is under pressure. In January, I had to correct myself and said, well, it's under direct attack. And this is a moment where I called on member states to form a cross-regional alliance. I think this is important, cross-regional alliance. I think this is also new now in 2026 compared to back in the 90s. And still in the UN, we have this regional settings which don't make sense at all anymore. For example, I'm the president being nominated on the Western European group and others. The others are the United States and Israel and Australia. So it was a setup somehow making logic back in time, but obviously now with the European Union, where Eastern European countries are part of, but it's really difficult to change these unwritten rules which there are. But nothing hinders other countries to join forces now, and we have seen that over and over again. We have seen that after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which was a violation, obviously, of the Charter, where more than 140 countries said in the General Assembly, this is a breach of international law. This is not only about Ukraine, this is not only about the European Union, this is about our life insurance, the Charter. We have seen that on a positive note, as you were mentioning before, with regard of trade, yeah, the interest of a free trade. And this is what I think in these days is sometimes being forgotten, that there is a power of these cross-regional alliances, and that it's not true, and again, I'm a big fan, obviously, of free media, but also journalists of free media, to remember them. What are you writing in your headlines? Yeah, I'm reading it every day. Yeah, the UN is not supported anymore. There's no majority in the UN for the Charter and for international law. This is wrong. Every day when I'm sharing the General Assembly sessions, yeah, we have votes, 160 states, 180 states. So 193 minus 2 or minus 5 or even minus 20 is not 0, it's also not, what is half of it, 87 or even more, 90. Yeah, so we have a 2/3 majority who believes in the Charter and is standing up every day for it. The difficult point, and this is new in these days, that we have pressure and blackmailing. We had it in the past as well, but we have in a social media world, we have fake news going around. So I think the second very important point, besides joining forces of those who believe in the international order, is speaking up for the truth. And this sounds so simple, but I think you know it better also here at Columbia, and the pressures you are feeling if you're speaking up to the truth. That if you speak up and you get blackmailed and you got a shitstorm, sorry, we Germans are very straightforward, yeah. My team always told me are not allowed to say it, but forgot what the nicer word is. But politicians, I felt it myself, this is pressure which is not easy. But again, if you join forces, then it's really hard also on social media. Remember Greenland. I mean, for how many weeks did you see images? We also images that pretended that Greenland somehow didn't belong to Greenlanders, and it's not connected to Denmark, and it's not connected to the EU. But at the moment when the EU united, it took them a couple of weeks to dare to speak up. But suddenly, putting on the table the question also to CEOs, I must say frankly and open, in these countries and around the world, saying, so do you want to have the European market as an American company? So maybe you have to speak up, because if this escalates, you have the situation that 2 NATO countries are standing in front of each other. So I think the point of speaking up for the truth is extremely important to support middle powers, which can never alone stand up to this bullying and blackmailing going around right now. And then third point, which I would also say we should not forget about, There was not a single decade in history, unfortunately, since 45, which we did not see conflicts and wars. I know we're short of time, so I'm not running through all of it. Yeah, but remember the Korean War, 50s, yeah, and 60s. Then we have Vietnam. Then we had also in the 90s, Srebrenica and Rwanda, genocides going on again. So it's not true that there were these perfect times where the UN could solve any problem. So this is my final point I really want to make. The UN was not created for the good times. One of the Secretary General said even, yeah, it was not created for bringing humankind to heaven, but to prevent it from hell, to prevent it from the Holocaust. And it's the same in national law. I mean, we have criminal codes, we have justice system, but still there are murders going on. And nobody would say we should just abolish the police and all the courts because they didn't prevent all the murders going on. But we have to invest in prevention. And this brings me to the peace building and all the work the UN is doing. Obviously, the more we do have from these powers, more funding to it, the stronger the UN can be in this regard. But in the end, it's always about the decisions every member state is doing, whether we stand up for international law and the treaties or not. And luckily, every member state who is waking up every morning and knowing that the future depends on the strength of the United Nations, they are standing up. And just one ambassador, he told us the other evening, saying, my country, Haiti, would not exist anymore if we would not have the UN these days, because another country, Kenya, is sending right now their people to another part of the world to protect the livelihood of civilians, and this is a core spirit of the United Nations, and this is why we should invest every day into this spirit of humanity.
Thank you very much for those remarks. You're a wonderful cheerleader for bringing together...
It's my job. I'm getting paid for this.
For bringing together the members of the United Nations to defend the Charter. And amongst the four very important points you make, the idea that middle powers can't make a difference singly, but can make a difference collectively, that is across regions and in groupings like the EU, I think is a very important point. And so shoulder to shoulder and locked arms, that could potentially make a difference. So thank you for those comments. Ambassador Wallace, what might you add to the ability of middle powers to step up?
Thank you so much. I've heard this discussion. I heard Prime Minister Carney. And I asked myself, what's a middle power? Because from the perspective of a small island in the Caribbean, surrounded by all of South America, Central America, North America, the United States and Canada, with our history of our relationship with the United Kingdom, our history of our relationships with Europe, and the individual countries within Europe. For us, there are a lot of big powers out there, not just one or two. I also come from the country that gave birth to Marcus Garvey, who said, if you have no confidence in self, you are twice defeated in the race of life. This so-called cohort of middle powers, for us, are not middle powers. They are countries who have extraordinary leverage that they are not yet using. Whether by themselves individually, to have the courage to step up and shoulder the responsibility that a vacuum of leadership may leave behind, or in consortiums, to come together in coalitions to demonstrate that collective will win over individual demonstrations of might. History is replete with examples of that over centuries. So my response to that is, don't see yourselves as secondary. If Jamaica took that position, we would have no voice at all. I wouldn't be here sitting with the President of the General Assembly on the same panel. So we must have the confidence, the sense of conviction, that the values that we hold dear were not illusions. And this is the part of Prime Minister Carney's speech in Davos that I disagree with. The notion that it was just all a facade, a face guard, that we didn't truly believe, we always knew that it was just there as window dressing. I cannot afford to believe that. I cannot afford to believe that, and the 3 million people that I represent in Jamaica do not believe that. We believe in the values. We believe that the United Nations stands for the rule of law. It stands for sovereignty. It stands for the kinds of things that keep civilization civilized. And without that, we go back to chaos. That's not an option for us. And the fact that it is challenging is not daunting for us either. Again, we're a small island developing state with a history of slavery and colonialism, battered by climate shocks and susceptible to all kinds of political, economic shocks. So we wake up every morning facing down the challenges. So when another one comes to us, we don't shirk, we don't give up, we don't say, oh, the sky is falling or the order doesn't work. We figure out our way through it. And this is what we need the international community to do, individually and collectively. To step up, believe in the convictions that values are important and that they are worth defending because they provide a stability that all of us benefit from. And the reverse, the absence of that stability is devastating, not just for one or two, but for all of us.
Great. Thank you very much for those remarks. It's great to hear a pushback against Prime Minister Carney's. I never quite figured out what he was saying, you know, how he was planning to mobilize the middle powers if he's saying that the order was false in some way or another. So I never quite figured that out. And it was a very un-Canadian thing to say, I thought, despite the fact he is such a wonderful prime minister of his country and in his own history is standing up for all of these values.
Well, I think, if I may, because I was thinking a lot about it and also speaking to my dear Canadian friends I've worked with before in my previous job and role. And this is why I would like to share it with you, because I think it's important, because I was also irritated. But if we are looking at part of the international order and of true believers in the international order, I think we have to be honest to ourselves that certain setups, for example, with the international financial institutions, when the United Nations was born or founded, it was kind of a division between the Americans and the Europeans with regard of one takes the Secretary General and the other takes the President of the General Assembly. One takes one financial institution, the other the others. Many countries were not even freed. They were still all under colonial rules. So more than 50 countries, I think even 70 countries afterwards joined. So they didn't have part of this puzzle. So I think this is a part with regard to the rules and the international order we believed in was also set up by those who were part of the club back then, but obviously left out, like in the security, Africa and Latin America with positions in the Security Council.
I think that's a very important remark. We're talking about the role of middle powers in substituting for poor behavior by superpowers, and that doesn't just extend to peace and security. Obviously, the Bretton Woods institutions could well deserve exactly that kind of attention. Let me turn to Anushka. She's had a very interesting experience studying special political missions. And I was wondering whether you would share what you learned from that experience, a few points that you think could make a difference in improving the behavior, the functions, the output of the United Nations in these crucial roles.
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. I think I'd like to cite the case of Yemen. During my time at US-UN, I had the opportunity to support the Security Council negotiations on Yemen very closely. So I have become, profoundly familiar with two of its key in-country presences, the UN mission to support the Hudaydah Agreement, which is known as UNMAHA, and the Office of the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Yemen. I am also undertaking my final capstone project here at SIPA, looking at the future design of special political missions, where I am also applying these learnings and insights from the Yemen case to this research. Just to give a little bit of context, I think that I personally very much agree with the Secretary General's proposal that was outlined in the UN 80 initiative to integrate UNMAHA into the Office of the Special Envoy. And this was further endorsed by the Security Council via a resolution that was adopted in January 2026 that called to sunset UNMAHA and then transfer its pertinent responsibilities over to the Office of the Special Envoy. So I think that this is a very interesting case because it provides an example of this very clear relationship between mandate development and the operational effectiveness of the mission on the ground, especially when we see such a complex operating environment like Yemen. So to share just some of my insights and my learnings, I think that UNMAHA's mandate, I wouldn't necessarily qualify it as a lowest common denominator resolution, but I do think that it serves as a very clear example of the trade-off that sometimes the Security Council contends with on one hand wanting to achieve a robust and comprehensive mandate, but on the other hand wanting to achieve Security Council consensus and unity. And what's important to note about UNMAHA's mandate is that it was established in order to address a very specific initiative, which was to implement the Hudaydah Agreement under the 2018 Stockholm Agreement that was reached for the conflict parties in Yemen. So because of this, its mandate has been crafted to be very focused and narrow and technical. And I think that the case can be made in this particular instance that, the conservative nature of its mandate arguably was the reason why it enjoyed Security Council consensus from 2019 to 2025, as was seen by, the unanimous decision by the Council to renew the mandate without any changes. But here is where we kind of begin to see that double-edged sword of, conservative and more focused mandates, where because UNMAHA's mandate was tied to the Stockholm Agreement, when the agreement failed back in 2020 due to the conflict parties' lack of willingness to cooperate with one another, UNMAHA's effectiveness began declining as well. And it was this limited nature of the mandate that therefore prevented it from having that flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances in Yemen. And that then, of course, reduced its relevance, especially in current contexts. By contrast, we look at the mandate of the Office of the Special Envoy, which is tasked more broadly to support a political transition in Yemen. And this provides the mission with the inherent flexibility to adapt and retailor its responsibilities to evolving circumstances on the ground. I think Yemen is a very interesting context because especially in recent years, we have seen the interrelated nature of the issues that are happening. As we've seen by this grave humanitarian crackdown that has happened with the Houthis, countless detentions of humanitarian and UN personnel, these very, very rampant and escalating tensions between the Houthis and Israel that have really become profound since the start of the Israel-Hamas war in 2023. And so all this to say that achievement towards a political transition now hinges on having success in achieving progress in some of these other areas, on humanitarian consideration, security sector reform, etc. And so to conclude, by then streamlining and merging UNMAHA into the Office of the Special Envoy, what the UN is then serving to do is creating an even more streamlined presence in Yemen that has oversight over all of the critical issues and makes the Office of the Special Envoy even more of this nimble and flexible and adaptable mission that is required in such a complex and fragile operating environment such as Yemen. So I do think that this case very well illustrates that this streamlining measure could serve as a key blueprint for the future of UN peace operations and special political missions in particular, if it is executed successfully, which we will see in the months to come.
Great, thank you very much for that comment. It's a wonderful little case study of Yemen and special political missions, but there has a long time been a tension between the authorization of a peace and security mission by the Security Council and then how it's conducted in the field. Now, there are regular reports that come back, But often in between those reports, a lot of decisions are taken that may or may not reflect the will of the Security Council. It came up in Libya during the context of the R2P mission in Libya, where the resolution was written with little positive phrases stuck in here and there, that when it came to implementation by the US and various European allies, were judged to have gone way beyond the authorized mandate of the Security Council. The governor of Brazil then stepped back and said, R2P is fine, but we also need RWP, responsibility while protecting, and looking for mechanisms that would continue to keep Security Council on board, authorizing what was actually happening on the ground. So I think you've identified at the field level the necessity of flexibility. And then in the Security Council side, there's going to be this continuing demand that the field mission be doing, especially when you get to delegating action to institutions like NATO, what is actually the will of the Security Council. So I think that tension is a very powerful one. We've got just a few minutes right now, and we haven't had this so far, but I thought we would radically innovate here for a second with the permission of my co-panelist and see if there's any question or one or two that might be posed from the floor. Because I think we have 10 minutes if I see Daniel nodding over there, which I think I do. Are there any questions? And we could loan you a microphone if there are. And I warn you that if you don't ask a question, I've got one to ask. So please step forward and pose your question. I see a volunteer over here, Daniel. Please give us your name if you would.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, our dear guests, that you're coming here tonight. My question is representative, I think, for many students here who want to enter the field of policy. You have the privilege, in a way, to have this experience now. And my question would be, what is your advice for us young people who might one day want to enter this field? Thank you very much.
Please. President and then Ambassador as well.
Speak now as a politician and not as a diplomat. The ambassador of Jamaica can take maybe this role. Be yourself, and this is also the point for the young people. Now maybe also that we are not agreeing on everything here in the room and have a bit of a discussion going on. For me, especially with regard to youth participation, it's so wonderful to see the strong engagement, and I myself, I'm being 46, the definition of being young is 35, so I still kind of feel young. And in my system in Germany, I was extremely young. And I think coming back to the point of middle powers and small countries, what I have learned a lot as a foreign minister is that especially small countries, because for like a functioning system, especially in democracies, you need like proportionately more people than related to your society, because certain functions you just need, so if you have only 2 million inhabitants or 5 million inhabitants and you still need the prime minister, all the ministers and the administration going on, the chances that you have younger generations in the system, also the chances that women and men are equally representative are way higher than, for example, we are not the biggest country, obviously, in Germany, 48 million. But we are extremely structural conservative. So I was, after 150 years, the first woman serving as a foreign minister. I was 40 when I entered into government, having 2 little daughters, and everyone, including female journalists on the TV shows, asked me, because I also ran as a chancellor in that election campaign, but can you really do the job, and who's taking care of your children? Maybe they didn't ask it that way, but they were kind of saying, but you have 2 little daughters, and I said, yes, and this is why I think after a pandemic, it needs somebody who knew what it meant to have a pandemic, schools being closed, because unfortunately in my country, nobody spoke about the fact what happened to the schools being closed. I'm sharing this fact with you related to your question. I mean, I had these offenses going on. She's too young, she's female, she has little kids, and they're special too young. And then the expectation, and she should dress like more like a man back in my system, not wearing dresses. So stay the same you are, because we need these young voices exactly because you're different than those people who have been there for decades in the system. We don't need young voices just to check the bottom of having young voices, but your experience, your knowledge, for example, on social media going on, yeah, even though I'm 46, I don't have any clue what's going on there on social media. I'm trying to be there with my profile. But the experiences you are having, the way you are addressing AI, for example, in these times, this is crucially important. So we don't need youth participation for youth conferences. We need young voices, a scientific panel, experts in the new scientific panel. So join there, be part of it, but really dare to stand up. And I tell you, the headwinds are strong, but stay there and unite. This is my second advice. You have to unite, especially as women. Yeah, because you can never make it alone, being faced with the headwinds. So if you join forces, this comes again to the middle forces as well. Join forces, and obviously you're not always right. So there is critique, which is right. So obviously then you should be self-reflective as well. But engage in politics, because this is what we are seeing as a third point in many, many countries, that also many people come to me saying, well, seeing what you have been through, I will never do this job. But obviously, this is the whole purpose, especially in countries where you see more autocratic regimes coming up, to silence the voices speaking up. So not only finish obviously your studies, which you should if you are at such a wonderful university, but afterwards, yeah, engage in diplomacy, in the public service. I know that the private sector pays way better, but we need your expertise, especially in the public services and hopefully in the field of diplomacy. So yeah, continue your course, and thank you for this great report as well, because this is what the UN really needs, and Ambassador Wallace was hinting to it. We are in the midst of a UN80 reform. We praised all the benefits of the UN, but we can both tell you it's very bureaucratic. So we need the outside look. We need also the question, because the difference between the UN and governments is that you don't have the checks and balances. So also with regard of everything which being done in the Secretariat, it's not that the General Assembly, like the Parliament and the opposition and the budget committee, is saying we hold you now accountable for what you're doing. So this is why the outside critical voice of what's going on there is so highly important to come to a successful reform within the United Nations. My term is over in September, so you have to turn then to Ambassador Wallace, because he kindly agreed to implement also the next step of the reform process, where we try to limit the 40,000 mandates we are having since 45. Obviously not very efficient, but this is up to your generation, if you enter then as a diplomatic actor in the UN, to maybe invent also the new thing of sunset clauses for mandates, that you have a termination of these kind of jobs.
Thank you very much for that great advice for young people and for your successors in the UN. Ambassador Wallace, advice for young people and for the reform process in the UN, if you would.
Thank you. Keep that enthusiasm. There is a line in this draft report, but in the report now, as it's been published, about realistic utopia. It's a great line. If we don't aspire to a higher order of things, then we're in a race for the bottom. If we don't aspire for clean air, we're destined to remain in smog. So keep your aspirations high. Do not start out being jaded. You don't have to be cynical. Realism is not an excuse for cynicism. So if you have that fire in your belly, if you believe in that commitment to making the world better, it will drive you to the success that you will need. And it will give you the voice that we all need to hear. I'm going to ask you as well to separate yourselves. Do not consider yourselves to be future generations, because you're not. You are present. You are part of the present generation. And your role in this is that you are closer to the future generations, but you are part of this one. So it is also your responsibility that you have to embrace as well, to ensure that we leave the world in a better place for the generations not yet born. So you have the push and the pull. You have the aspirational pull that keeps you joyful and enthusiastic, but you also have the burden of responsibility to help to shape the world that we will pass on to future generations, to take account of their interests and their needs, even as we're trying to find our way to satisfy our own. And if you do that, the world will be a better place.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. The line realistic utopia, it comes from Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And Rousseau put it that men as they are, and he meant men and women as they are, laws as they should be. That is, we can't change human nature, but we can make better laws, a better charter, better policies. And that's what I think he was driving at. And from my perspective, we've heard so much of that from my panelists right here. So please join me in thanking them for their many, many insights on the nature of peace and order and the challenges that we face today in the United Nations. Please join me.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I apologize. It's always hard. You've heard some really eloquent speeches, some really insightful ideas and hopes, and now you have to bear 4 minutes with me for the concluding remarks to highlight a few things we've done today. The 2024 Pact for the Future was mentioned several times in, I think, every single panel we had today. Highlighted, or in the Pact, states highlighted that they wanted to make multilateralism, I quote, effective and capable, prepared for the future, just, democratic, equitable and representative of today's world, inclusive, interconnected, and financially stable, unquote. Our report, that, by the way, we will send to you again after the meeting today, and today's discussion have shown that despite actions by many different actors, we're still far away from advancing any of these aspects of multilateralism, let alone all of them. Tonight, we listened to many nuanced discussions and debates on the role, on the reform of UN processes, on global cooperation. And let me reiterate one point I made in the introduction 3 hours ago. Any broad, generalizing statement about the UN is necessarily incorrect. We need very differentiated, nuanced discussions, and I encourage you to do that and to pinpoint people to where they're failing. We also heard, and in this last panel, in the panel before that, and in the first panel, many examples of the UN's clear achievements. And I think that is really worth highlighting. Despite the shortcomings, the politicization of the UN, the institutional biases that exist, and, yes, the inefficiencies, the work of the UN has been successful in many fronts. And it's important to remember that this fact when discussing the future of the UN, if we need more or less multilateralism, if we need thicker or thinner forms of multilateralism. We heard from the President of the General Assembly about the initial steps in the process of electing a new Secretary General. We heard from government representatives, long-time UN staff members, scholar practitioners, and youth leaders that a strong UN is more important than ever in spite, or maybe because, of the existential threats it is experiencing. We heard many small and big reform proposals, Some echo the proposals we made in the report, some diverge from it, some go further. I don't believe all the things that we have suggested in the report or that we've discussed today on this panel or on the different panels can be implemented in the current geopolitical context. But I do hope that the actors in the current environment are careful not to jeopardize what the UN can do and decrease the role for future reforms. The UN must prevail as a bulwark against member states that are trying to tear down international order. A deeper UN reform requires, first, work and commitment by the global community, especially by member states. It requires, and that is where some of academics come in, an understanding of the need for multilateral cooperation to secure global public goods and other cross-border challenges. It needs, and again, that is we're pointing towards member states, sufficient and pooled, responsible, flexible funding. Without funding, the UN cannot do what it needs to do. And the last, we need a really ambitious reform. The UN 80 is a very good starting point, but the UN 80 is not a very ambitious reform project. I endorse that we need to create a system of institutions by the UN that really are a system that make sense for the planet and the people who live on the planet. I thank you, especially those who have joined us 3.5 hours ago, for being part of this journey through our vision for the UN we must aspire to. Let us take today's ideas, hopes, suggestions, concerns as a starting point, as one step we've taken together jointly, and let us keep aspiring together. Thank you, and we conclude today's conference.